Chapter 16, Investing. In this chapter, I'll talk about what to look for in a horse, what to look for in a jockey, and my best hack for finding the new hot investment possibility. Aside from queries looking for beginner entrepreneurial advice, I probably get more emails asking me to consider investing in startups than any other. I have a lot of evolving feelings about being an investor. By now, I've probably looked at tens of thousands of deals, and yet it's still a pretty new role for me. My investing career didn't follow the most traditional path. Most successful investors probably start small, take a few missteps, and have some success here and there before they finally get into a position to hit the motherlode. I kind of did that backwards. What happened was I started recognizing that I had been right about a lot of things like email marketing, e-commerce in general, banner advertising, and Google AdWords. And then one day, I read that YouTube, the video sharing platform that I had begun saying was going to be huge, had sold to Google for $2 billion. It occurred to me that maybe all this right stuff could probably make me a lot more money than just selling a few extra bottles of Cabernet. So I promised myself that whatever I spotted as the next big thing, it could have been a chewing gum as easily as a new digital platform, I would try to get involved. That thing was called Twitter. Twitter caught my attention in 2006 and 2007. While everyone else debated the value of a platform that lets you tell the world you were eating pizza, I recognized it as a communication platform that would change the world. I became bullish on Twitter and consequently became friends with early employees. Eventually, an opportunity came in the form of one employee deciding to sell off all of his stock. By the way, as a side note, I spent most of my time trying to talk him out of that emotional decision, which I ended up unfortunately being right, but he's a great guy, but it is what it is. He sold it all. And I was able at that moment to pick up a ton of Twitter stock at an incredibly low valuation. Once that happened, I stepped back and took note that there was another platform that was interesting to me called Tumblr. I'd noticed that a lot of high school students, one in specific, Louis Janot, who now works at VaynerMedia, were using Tumblr, and he told me that everyone he knew was on Tumblr. I knew at that point it was going mainstream. From that point, I became friends with founder David Karp and president John Maloney. They were looking for marketing ideas, and by 2008, I had established myself as a personality in the space. That gave me the opportunity to invest in its B round at a ridiculously low-level valuation. Subsequently, it sold to Yahoo for $1 billion. During that same period, maybe within a month, my 2-year relationship with several Facebook employees put me in a position to invest also in a very low valuation when some Facebook family members decided to sell stock. So within an incredibly short period of time, I made 3 investments in what turned out to be 3 massively profitable events for me. I started off hot. Maybe it was inevitable that when I finally stumbled, it would be a faceplant of epic proportions. Get this. I was actually in the room in Paris when Garrett Camp was first pitching the idea of Uber to Travis Kalanick, and I and a couple of others. We didn't spend that much time on it, by the way, which is a little fun note, but clearly they spent more time on it later. As a matter of fact, in my first book that many of you read called Crush It, if you're in your home right now or your office, go and grab it and go to the acknowledgement page. I have it here in front of me. I'm going to read you a little part of my acknowledgements page in 2009, long before Uber was invented. And finally, this would not be the book it is without the thoughtful comments of Travis Kalanick, who gave me the perfect feedback in late innings. That's right, many years before he became the famous CEO of Uber and one of the most iconic businessmen of this generation, Travis was just a great, great friend of mine who's angel investing alongside. And yet, after all that, I passed on investing in the Uber Angel round twice. When you put that into context, just lightweight, that $25,000 or $50,000 check that I was writing for many other companies around that time would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars today. Pretty tough. If I had gone in, it would probably be changing my life immensely. It sure would have gotten me a lot closer to buying the New York Jets. I like to refer to this event as my almond moment. After the AskGaryVee episode where I promised the Vayner Nation that anyone that could guess the number of almonds that were filling the big glass jar on my table, I'd pay their way to New York and they could sit with me during the next episode. There were 1,424 almonds in the jar. At Boost Lacrosse, with 2 O's, I want to give them a shout out now because you're not going to believe this. Guess that there was 1,423 almonds. 1 almond off. Close, but no cigar. And that's right, as a side note, I did not fly him in. I stuck to my word. Everybody thought I should do something. Nope. I'm not into 8th place trophies. I'm not into 2nd place trophies. Luckily, Travis gave me another shot later, and I invested and I grabbed a little bit later at a much higher, much higher valuation. And I'm sure Boost Lacrosse won't let the next big opportunity slip away either. The almond jar always gets refilled, and when it does, you try again. I learned from my mistake and was lucky enough to go on to become part of a small group of super angels, men and women with personal brand awareness like Kevin Rose, Chris Sacca, and Jason Calcanis, looking for opportunities to invest. I later made some nice investments in companies like Wildfire and Birchbox, and eventually, in late 2013, I started a venture fund with Stephen Ross and Matt Higgins and my brother AJ called Vayner RSE, a $25 million seed fund that invests in early-stage internet media companies. By the time you're listening to this, I'll have another fund called Vayner Capital, which is now a late-stage venture fund writing bigger checks in companies that are a little bit more mature. I've been watching and learning, and I think we're living in interesting times. I see a lot of young companies going for the investments. And then instead of building up their businesses, they spend all their time working towards the next round of funding. There seems to be a disturbing lack of patience and scrappiness out there in investment land, to the point that I've changed the way I consider businesses. In fact, I go so far to advise a lot of businesses to reconsider going for VC money at all. It's useful, to be sure, but I think it can make people lazy. The company whose founders have made great things happen on a shoestring and spent every dime and drop of sweat on building the best product they can before reaching out to VC dollars, that's the company I've got my eye on.
Hey everyone, this is Christy Kerr, 18-time tour winner on the LPGA Tour. I am so excited to be reading the next questions in the AskGaryVee book. Thanks for having me. Question number 1. What should I focus on with the companies that I invest in?
Look, I think you should be focusing on the entrepreneur, right? I think the jockey matters more than the horse. Actually, Christy, let's use you as an example. I'd much more focus on you than the clubs that you use, right? You're going to make any club work because you're great at golf. And I think way too many people focus on the clubs and the cleats. And again, in this world, it's the business. Oh, that's a great idea. Cupcakes that get delivered on demand in 1 second when you hit a button. But if the operator doesn't know how to build a marketplace, how to build the app that delivers that, how to employ people that can actually make that happen, you lose. The number one thing that I've learned in investing is bet on the jockey over the horse. A lot of times the jockey changes the horse and still makes you money.
Question number 2. You've said that sometimes you invest in horses or companies and sometimes in the jockeys, founders. What do you look for in each?
Off of the rant that I just drilled on you, let me talk a little bit about the companies. They're the compelling ideas that I secretly am so blown away by. And I'm like, oh my God, I just saw the future, that I'm willing to hold my breath if I don't believe in the founder. Now, by the way, the Holy Grail is like, look at that horse and look at that jockey. And that was what Facebook was. Oh my God, look at Zucks, look at Facebook. But there's been times where I bet on businesses because they're so compelling. They're so right. They are in my thesis, the way I would look at virtual reality and esports companies right now. I believe in those spaces so much that if I see a jockey, a CEO that I don't fully believe in, there's a part of my brain that says, well, she or he will get it to a certain level, then we'll replace the CEO and I'll still make money. I've got companies on my portfolio that are right there right now. And so that's why I would bet on a horse, aka a company. Jockeys, I just explained to you, I always believe in the best jockeys are willing to pivot, willing to adjust, willing to change their business model. It's unbelievable how that actually works. And so that's self-explanatory.
Question number 3. What's your stance on investing in competitive companies?
This came across my desk very early on in my investing career. Probably the 5th or 6th investment I ever made was a company called Gowalla, which was competing with a company called Foursquare. Now, most of you know Foursquare, or maybe you've heard about it in the 2011, 12, that range. I'd invested in Gowalla, and I had a chance to invest in Foursquare, which was at that point the leader at a little bit of a later round, but still very underpriced in my opinion. And at that point, some people were doing those kind of things. I just couldn't wrap my head around. Remember what my dad said? I didn't understand how to be involved on both sides of the equations. Like, how do you root for the Carolina Panthers and the Denver Broncos in a Super Bowl? You can't. You got to pick one. And I felt that I gave my word to Gowalla by my investment and my time and my brains. And so I don't do it. I know that some people do as hedging their bet. I know that some companies are okay with investors doing that because they just want the money. It's just not for me.
Question number 4. You talk a lot about upcoming companies and predicting their success. Where and how do you find these companies?
You know, first I follow tastemakers that are covering things like that. I'm a big fan of Jason Hirschhorn's Redef newsletter. He talks about stuff like that. Tech Meme is an aggregator of tech blogs, which they're just writing a story of like blah, 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 gets funded. And I'm like, oh, what's that? Recode, a great blog. I love Nuzzle. Nuzzle is an app that I passed on that might be another regret, that aggregates my Twitter feed of my friends and allows me to see things. But my number one favorite hack is to go to the iTunes store and see what the top 150 apps are in the iOS platform. And then that's how I found Yik Yak and Snapchat and Musical.ly and Dubsmash. Like, I watch trends based on raw data. It's not opinions. It's just raw data. This is what's doing well. And so I keep my eye very close to that. And don't forget, I'm now established as a venture capitalist, one that's popular and has done well. And so a lot of stuff's coming to me, like literally emails that are like, we have this idea, we'd love to meet with you. I mean, that's exciting to me. I'm getting to see stuff very, very early. I try to give you 3 examples of things that you can do. That last one's uniquely for me. Get the results and let the bees come to you.
Question number 5. What usually prompts you to walk away from great opportunities?
You know, usually it's my intuition. In hindsight, a lot of times it's been my lack of education. This is not something I touched on the show. This is an added value kind of question. I often say my intuition because it's been wrong at times, but it's been right more than wrong, and that's why I use it. I think the other thing, and the maturity of my venture capital experience I think is about to happen, is the data. Like, I think that, meaning I didn't have a full view of the competitive landscape, and now that I have analysts and a more mature fund, I've got the math along with my intuition that allows me to make much better decisions. So the lack of knowledge around everything has definitely been the way I've passed on things. Lack of foresight. I didn't see Uber. There's nothing else to say. I didn't see Airbnb. I didn't see it early enough. I saw it way earlier than other people, not early enough to really win. And so that's happened, and that's that. But listen, I've got to trust my intuition. It's been so good to me. And so if you're somebody who's not done as well on your intuition, you need to take that as a real thing and bring in somebody intuitive. Too many of you are trying to make your intuition work. It's either going to work or not. Your skill might be running the data and analyzing. There's been plenty of people that have beaten me on the math versus my skill. My natural intuition skill. I've lost that game plenty of times. I've won that game plenty of times. So you got to bet on your strengths. Another good example to push that.
Question number 6. How do you balance risk and reward?
I personally do it with optimism, which means I'm looking at the reward more than the risk. I'm not scared. I take risks every day. I'm a true bred 100% entrepreneur. I don't know anything else. First of all, I accept risk in everything, yet I don't respect risk. I don't. It's an interesting thing. I'm aware of it, but I'm not scared of you, risk. I'm looking over to the side right now and making pretend I'm looking at risk. I don't know. It's very weird right now in the booth. Risk, I don't respect you. I'm not scared of you. Reward is much more interesting to me. And so my optimism and my history and my successes allow me to really weigh the upside more. A good example is when I invested in Meerkat. Meerkat live stream platform. At that point, I already knew about Periscope. Periscope is a platform that's, by the way, hindsight, Periscope's winning, and I knew why they could, because they could use Twitter. Twitter bought it. It was infrastructure. Meerkat was solo by itself. I knew Facebook would come. Sure enough, they did. Facebook Live. I myself, as an investor in Meerkat, am using Periscope and Facebook Live more, but I still knew that if Ben Rubin, the CEO, did the right things, if a couple things clicked the right way, that even though Meerkat was kind of like the incumbent, it could win. And so I weighed the upside, because if it had won, it'd be $1 billion company, multi-billion. And so I had to make that bet because the upside was too big for the risk. I do that every day. I really think that if you value or overthink risk too much, your upside as an entrepreneur is very limited.
Question number 7. Does instability with China and the macroeconomic environment affect how you see the world?
100 billion %. I'm not naive to what's going on in a macroeconomic climate. I also can't control it. So it affects me, but I don't over-respect it. First of all, 2001 after 9/11, when most of my business was on Wall Street, as you can imagine, affected. 2009, 7, 8, when I started VaynerMedia, affected by the macroeconomic climates. Those were my biggest growth years. I referenced it earlier that I'm a wartime general. Let me explain. I like running businesses during tough times because the only people that win are the super A's. No more winning for B and C players during a tough time. There's not enough food for the B and C players. I'm a super A. So the bottom line is I'm paying attention to it. It affects me. I could lose money on paper. But for example, VaynerMedia explodes if people become tighter with their budgets because what I do in marketing actually has value. So, this is how I see the world. So I do pay attention. It does affect me. I'm not blind to it. I always want to pay attention to what can cause me different outcomes that are not in my control. But I think my control allows more upside.
Question number 8. How beneficial do you think patents are in being able to set up a startup apart from the competition?
Patents are not a thing that I like to talk about so much because I'm not really passionate about them. I've never thought about applying patents. I know they're necessary, but it got really bad in the last 20 years. Everybody's like suing anybody with random ideas, filing stuff and then waiting 17 years and hoping to use it against people. It's a dirty kind of world. I don't know. It's not a world I know super well. I took this question because I thought it was important for me to ground my context because a lot of people were asking me. I don't know. It just seems like patents have gotten very far away from what they were intended to do so long ago. It seems not practical to me, and it's something I don't spend a lot of time on.
Hello, everybody. This is Eric Dellenbeck. I'm the Executive Director and President of the Tim Tebow Foundation. I'm so grateful for the passion that Gary has for our foundation and so many other nonprofits around this country. It's my pleasure to read the next 5 questions of the AskGaryVee book. Thanks so much for having me. Number 1, why don't you invest in space, biotech, or life sciences?
Easy, because one of my most famous quotes of my keynote career is, "Hey guys, I was a really bad student. As a matter of fact, I used to read the Wine Spectator in science class, because I didn't give a shit about Saturn." And then everybody laughs. It's because I failed science. It's because I have no idea about life sciences, biotech, and space. And I think it's a very, 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 very bad idea to invest in things that you don't understand. Period. Let's move on.
Number 2, how does geography affect your investment decisions? Is where the founders or their business is located important to you?
Yeah, I would say it's important to me, including little things that are practical, like how often can I get to see them? How much of a help can I be if they're in a different time zone? So international is something I've stayed away from for the most part, though I'm starting to do more of. But the thing that I'm most passionate about is that Pinterest started in Pennsylvania. Facebook started in Boston. A lot of the things start in other parts of the country and then end up in Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley has this big kind of attitude of all the best things happen there. Sure, because people gravitate towards there after the fact. It's like being a great actress and being born in Iowa, but then you go to LA or New York, you go to where the market is. So I'm very conscious of that. I know that great companies can start anywhere. Your zip code isn't predicated on your ability to create something incredible. You may end up in San Francisco, but more and more you may end up in New York and LA as well. So I think that it's really interesting times. It affects it, but it is, it's more practical stuff. It's not like, oh, you invented this in San Francisco, then you must be great. Because I've done a lot of early stage stuff, this stuff can come from anywhere.
Number 3, will you ever play in syndicate platforms like CircleUp or AngelList in the future?
Let me talk about syndicates because I don't think a lot of people know about it. There's a new Jobs Act that Obama passed that allowed non-accredited investors to get involved in these deals. And so now you're going to start seeing a lot of like Kickstarter, like AngelList stuff where I will sit at the top and say, hey, I'm about to invest in this company and you might want to put $500 into it. Before you couldn't do that. Now you can. And then I would take a piece of the action. I would take 20% of the upside as the person that got you into this deal. A lot of people are doing it. It's not something I've looked at yet. I've been very busy with my own fund and raising my new fund. It's been made for guys like me. A lot of my contemporaries, those super angels, Jason Calacanis, for example, has done it that I mentioned early. Yeah, it's something I may look at, but I feel like it's going to get a bad rap because I have a feeling a lot of people that can't afford to lose money are going to lose money chasing their Facebook. So I'm just kind of watching for now. I tend to like to watch most marketplaces for a little bit before I jump in because I like to collect context.
Number 4, what should companies expect from their investors at each stage of investment?
Well, first, let's start with expectations. I think in general, expectations are dangerous, especially because way too many people are making expectations around investors, around assumptions. I also think a lot of investors are selling things that they don't deliver on. It's a pretty tough ecosystem actually right now. I think companies should expect their investors to do what those investors tell them they're going to do when they meet. The truth is that doesn't happen very often. A lot of VCs talk about all these other things that they could be doing. At the end of the day, what they're giving you is capital. And by the way, capital's enough. You need money. So I think this is more on the companies. A lot of people like to throw VCs under the table. I would tell companies to ask very hard questions if they're looking for smart money, which is the slang term for money that's going to do other things for you, help you raise the next thing, help you build your business. Everybody claims it. Most people don't do it. I only claim it around the thing I do best, which is marketing, but a lot of times I don't even get around to doing it because I'm stretched thin, which is why I'm trying to do fewer deals.
Number 5, should founders always be the ones that end up running their company when and if they reach $1 billion valuation?
Absolutely not. I mean, the leader of a company that's 50 million is not necessarily the same leader that is the one that can drive it to success at $1 billion. As a matter of fact, most often not. For every Bezos and Zuckerberg, I mean, I'm not even sure I talked about earlier that I can be, but I got to do it. Proof is in the pudding. I can say anything I want. I love the growth trajectory of like 3 to 500 million. Maybe I won't like having 400,000 employees, though I think I will. So I don't think so. I think that's crazy talk. I think historically it was never considered. Like if you go, 60s, 70s, 80s, because you thought you had to get a Harvard Business School person to do it after the entrepreneur did it. I think now more and more people are realizing the world is more entrepreneurial, even at the highest levels. And so that we're more acceptable to it because of the dot-com operators like a Bezos, like a Zucks. But yeah, I would actually argue 95%, 97% of the time it shouldn't. There are people that are going to break through and can do it from zero to hero.